Hey everyone, Pugs here, back with another huge season review, this time zooming out on Season 6 of SpongeBob SquarePants. For my returning viewers, y'all could probably explain how these videos work in your sleep by now, so I'll keep this next part brief. If you're new to the channel or haven't seen one of my season overviews before, first off, welcome, it's great to have you here. And secondly, I'll quickly explain just what's about to go down, with maybe slightly more detail than usual since I know I've got a lot of new viewers. So this video is, of course, my review of the entirety of Season 6. After this introduction, I'll be ranking all of the episodes of the season, outlining my top 5 and bottom 5, and discussing each episode as I go. Then, I'll briefly discuss the average episode rating of the season, and then I'll launch into a meaty discussion of the entire season, ending, as always, with some closing thoughts. If you could be so kind as to turn your attention to the screen for a moment, if you're treating this video as a podcast, which I don't blame you, I just want to show y'all my rating system. This is, of course, what I've been using for each of my episode reviews, but sometimes it's good to lay out all of the tiers like this. I'm not going to waste time explaining each tier because I've already done that. If you're curious about what constitutes each tier, I suggest checking out my Season 1 overview video, which is linked in the description as always. That video also spends more time talking about each component of this general season review structure, so I recommend looking at that video in general if you haven't seen it before. And then one last thing before I get started on the tier list, y'all already know what it is, I do this every time, I just have to say a big ol' thank you to everyone who's been supporting the channel during my reviews of this season. The channel just about exploded during the course of reviewing this season, for reasons entirely unrelated to my reviews, which I find hilarious, and it's been amazing. I hit lots of milestones during my coverage of Season 6, including both 1,000 and 2,000 subscribers, and reviewing the 10th anniversary special of the show. Pretty damn cool, and it's all cause of y'all. It makes me really happy that so many people are interested in my little reviewing channel. There's a lot more I could say, but I'll save all that for the second section of gratitude that I leave for the closing thoughts. Alrighty then. That just about covers it for this introduction. I think it's high time we jump right into this tier list, don't you think? Okie dokie. As per usual, I'm here on tiermaker.com with a SpongeBob SquarePants Season 6 tier list maker in front of me, pre-labeled with all of my personal tiers, and the episode list in production order. Because yes, that is something I do manually. Anyway, like usual, I'm gonna rank these episodes from best to worst, starting with my top 5 and ending with my bottom 5, and going through all of those episodes that are in between. When I discuss the episodes while ranking them, I'll be giving very brief, frequently incomplete, summaries of my thoughts on them. If you're ever curious about hearing further thoughts on an episode, check out the review for it. I think that's just about all I need to explain, so let me get started. Starting things off for our tier list here will of course be my favorite episode of Season 6, and that honor goes to Patty Caper, which had come in with a wonderful score of 9.5 out of 10. I just adored this episode. The mystery aspect was compelling, the comedy was fantastic, the dramatics come in at just the right moments, and it was just a very, very enjoyable watch. Everything hit the way it needed to, and a nice bonus about this episode is that it feels like the spiritual sister, or perhaps successor, to Spy Buddies, my favorite episode of Season 5. Close behind my top episode of the season is my second favorite episode, which also came in with a score of 9.5 out of 10, SpongeBob SquarePants vs. The Big One. I'm aware that this isn't a very popular opinion, but I really love this special. It leans into its own absurdity, never gets boring, features some good background and non-background music, balances multiple stories, and is just a lot of fun. Really, I couldn't ask for anything else from a special episode, and yet this special is one of the only ones in the show to really do all of this, and perhaps that's why it stands out to me. In third place, we've got Suction Cup Symphony, which was one of 2 episodes with a score of 9.4 out of 10. This episode was simply a lot of fun. The plot was enjoyable, but where the episode really shines is in the comedy. There's so many visual gags in this episode, and they're so damn good. And then the episode also ends with Squidward winning, which is always wholesome and satisfying. The other episode to come in with a score of 9.4 out of 10, and my fourth favorite episode of the season was Squid's Visit. This is certainly an unpopular opinion, but I don't care. The episode is fantastic. What I love most about this episode is how it cultivates a horror comedy atmosphere, really leaning into suspense and horror. And the comedy isn't hampered here like it was in an episode like Spongehenge, which keeps the episode intensely amusing and enjoyable. But really, it's that ability to cultivate an atmosphere that really makes me adore this episode. Like, that writing is just so great. This show is surprisingly good at being creepy. And now for the last episode of my top 5, this honor is gonna go to Penny Foolish, which came in with a score of 9.3 out of 10. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think every choice for my top 5 of this season, except maybe the first, is an unpopular opinion of some kind. Oh well. Anyway, this episode, like the others, is just a lot of fun. Mr. Krabs' obsession with getting the assumed penny from SpongeBob is so masterfully written and portrayed, and the episode is definitely strong in the comedy factor. And the character dynamics here are particularly notable. Everyone bounces off of each other quite well. All just makes for a simple recipe for a great episode. Alright, so that's the top 5 episodes of Season 6, but we're nowhere near done going through this Riddle amazing tier yet because Season 6 had 16 episodes land in this tier, so we've still got 11 more to go. 2 other episodes beyond Penny Foolish also came in with a score of 9.3 out of 10, and the first of these that I'm going to be ranking here is No Hat for Pat. This is a surprisingly enjoyable episode. What kept it out of the top 5 is that the gag of Patrick falling got a little repetitive, though they did attempt to switch it up. There were also some minor art issues in this episode, but that's so minor it's hardly even worth mentioning. Nah, this episode was really great for the characters and character interactions, and it was especially strong in the SpongeBob and Patrick friendship quality, and that's something that I always love to see. Next is Single Cell Anniversary, which is the last episode to come in with a score of 9.3 out of 10. I really love how this episode portrayed Plankton and Karen's relationship. It gave it a bit more depth and made it more loving than what we usually see, which was very appealing for me. The episode also had SpongeBob and Plankton interact in a bit of a different capacity than normal. I also think that this episode features some nuanced writing that I'm not going to take the time to get into here. Just know that I think that. 2 episodes came in with a score of 9.2 out of 10, and the first of these that I'm putting up here in the tier list is A Life in a Day. This is a rather famous episode because of Living Like Larry, and this episode deserves its fame because it's really good. It's really funny, it's really enjoyable, and it's actually got a really good message behind it. It also touches on some of the untapped comedy potential of Larry the Lobster, which I can appreciate. The reason why this episode is a little bit lower on the scale is because it took a second to get started, but that's hardly much of a problem at all. And in the other episode with a 9.2 out of 10 was Chum Bucket Supreme. There you are. The real selling point of this episode was that it featured Plankton and Patrick interacting in a meaningful capacity on their own for just about the first time ever. Outside of that, the episode was also amusing and potentially could be seen as a commentary on advertising, but perhaps that's just me. I tend to look into things and parse out those narrative details. Either way, I like this episode, plain and simple, truly can't put it any other way. 3 episodes had a score of 9.1 out of 10. This tier is really just a bunch of ties. Anyway, the first of these episodes is gonna be Cephalopod Lodge. One of the many hot takes I have regarding Season 6. I literally don't care. This episode is great. The middle of it is a bit weak, which is why this episode is on the lower end of the amazing tier, but it is certainly not bad. And the beginning and ending of the episode is just so damn good. The character interactions in this episode are so great, and the comedy is very strong, and there are some jokes I'll always remember vividly because they're just that funny. The very beginning of the episode as well skillfully draws viewers in with a little bit of mystery, which is just one of those elements that kinda always wins with me. After that episode will be Not Normal, which of course had that 9.1 out of 10 score. Another generally entertaining episode. What I really like about this one is that it has a message. This episode very much parallels the real-life experiences of a lot of neurodivergent, specifically people with ADHD or autism, have, or at least that's how I feel about it. Given that I've already made my stance clear that SpongeBob is an ADHD icon, this is a rather significant episode for me that is only added to with that analysis of SpongeBob's character. This may not be the funniest episode ever, but the plot is strong, and the comedy is there when it needs to be. The final episode to come in with a score of 9.1 out of 10 was Spongicus. This is one of those episodes with a very simple plot, meaning that a lot of the enjoyment factor is carried by the comedy. However, this episode also has the bonus of having the characters be in a very different situation than normal, given the whole gladiator setting, so that's another nice addition to this episode that elevates it. There's also small character moments here that I like SpongeBob jumping into the fray without hesitation to save Patrick, that also give this episode the leg up. So, the last 4 episodes in the Amazing tier all came in with a score of 9 out of 10, because I couldn't get out of this tier without the most challenging tie yet. Because let me tell you right now, when it comes to the first 3 of these, they could honestly be placed in any order. Deciding on a ranking order was exceedingly difficult, and so you can really take this as a 3-way tie for the ones I'm about to be talking about for the next couple of minutes. The first of these 9 out of 10s I've decided to put on the tier list is Slide Whistle Stooges. There we go. This is another one of those episodes that was very, very light on the plot, and it was all about the gags. And it stands out because so many of these gags were auditory, or at least audiovisual. And what I really love is that even though we hear these slide whistles so much, they never get annoying, at least not to me. And this is also an episode where Squidward kind of gets to unleash his childish side, and that's always fun. This episode just makes me smile, and that's all there is to it. After that is going to be the Krabby Chronicle. I just think that this is a very neat episode. The newspaper plot makes it stand out. Even though for much of its runtime it's predictable, it still continues to be engaging and enjoyable. There's also at least a smidgen of social commentary here. I mean, embellishing the news? Come on. Also, the last bit of this episode with SpongeBob standing up to Mr. Krabs in his own way is literally gold, and while this episode isn't the funniest, it certainly has plenty of great moments. And up next is gonna be Sandcastles in the Sand, which of course had that 9 out of 10 score. This is one of the better known and most beloved episodes of Season 6, so I have to wonder if it comes as a disappointment to see it near the tail end, or at the near tail end at least, of my Amazing tier. Like many of the episodes listed so far, this episode is light on the plot and heavy on the gags, and in this case, the action. And it's fun. This episode is just a lot of fun. What leaves me placing it so low in this tier is that although the episode is fun, I wouldn't call it very funny. The episode also took a little while to really get started, which also took a bit of points off. And then the very last episode of the Amazing tier, the last episode with a 9 out of 10 that I like ever so slightly less than the 3 above it, is Pineapple Fever. I keep saying this, but this episode is fun. It's just fun. I like the plot, I think it's a good setup for the episode, the final gag of the episode is iconic. However, where this episode is weak is in the humor, because there's a couple of gags that just don't land for me and cause the episode to slightly drag. But those issues are, relatively speaking, minor. Maybe more major than all of the episodes that have come before this one, but minor compared to the episodes that'll follow. So you can consider this episode to be the worst of the best. Alrighty, let's talk about the Great tier. 9 episodes found themselves in this tier. These episodes are also, of course, very good. Not the best of the best, but still good and great in their own right. And there are not as many ties this time for once, so that made doing the ranking here a bit easier. Starting things off for the orange-colored tier here is Gullible Pants. If I can find it, there it is. Which came in with a score of 8.8 out of 10. So this is one of the more prominent hidden gems of Season 6, given how forgotten it is, and this episode has a very basic premise. Squidward is in charge of the Krusty Krab and tricks SpongeBob using that power. Where this episode shines is in the comedy. It's a very funny episode. However, what brings this episode down is the beginning of it. Leaning into tropes utilizing toxic masculinity values does not a good plot setup make. If it weren't for that, this episode would be a few points higher. Up next is another one of my many unpopular opinions, House Fancy, which came in with a score of 8.7 out of 10. I don't care. I do not care. This episode is good. It just is. The parodying of HGTV shows is something that I certainly adore because those shows are a nostalgic guilty pleasure of mine. The plot is just enjoyable and amusing, and best of all, Squidward wins in the end. The only thing that really brings this episode down is that it's not super funny, but that's not a damning quality. Yes, the toenail scene doesn't mean shit to me. If you want to know any more about that, you can watch the episode review, but these are my paraphrase thoughts. Because I'm addicted to giving hot takes, the next episode on the ranked list is gonna be Truth or Square, which also came in with an 8.7 out of 10. I think this episode, or TV movie really, is very good, and a great celebration of the show's 10th anniversary. There are a few moments where the comedy is weak or even non-existent, and those are largely limited to the second half or so of the episode. And when the comedy is working in this episode, it's working very, very well. There's just so many hilarious jokes here that serve as highlights for the episode. Just lots to love here. However, I am less than enthused by the exclusion of many of the show's female cast. Yeah, I said it. I mean, come on now. Continuing down the list, we've got Krabby Road, which had a score of 8.6 out of 10. Like many episodes that find themselves in the great tier, this episode is quite enjoyable, however the comedy is a little intermittent. However, this episode is really elevated by its plot, which is interesting, and it leads our characters getting some fun outfits, which is fun. And this is just a good, solid episode. There's not too much else I can add to that. Up next is gonna be No Nose Knows, which came in with a score of 8.4 out of 10. For me, this is another one of those episodes that's just a lot of fun. There's lots of good jokes, the plot is engaging and interesting and asks a silly what-if question, and the episode is generally very amusing. There are a few things that aren't as good here, like Patrick is a bit too irritating at some points, but that doesn't stop me from considering this to be a really good episode, hence it sits in the middle of the great tier. After that is going to be Shell Shocked, which also had a score of 8.4 out of 10. This episode already had the advantage of featuring my favorite little guy, Gary the Snail. However, that's obviously not the reason it's in this tier. What's tricky about this episode is that it has a lot of really good stuff and a decent number of not so good things. There's lots of great jokes, and I of course appreciate the inclusion of my boy, and the plot is generally good. But there are moments that aren't so funny, moments that drag, and moments that are kinda gross or even frustrating. But the good wins out in the end for me, so this is a great episode. Following that one is gonna be Computer Overload, which had come in with a score of 8.3 out of 10. This is one of the more forgettable episodes of Season 6, and it's also one that I consistently find myself surprised about how much I enjoy. In general, this episode was amusing, not particularly funny, though it has its moments, but still, it was an amusing episode. Being that this episode was before Single Cell Anniversary, Plankton is just an irredeemable ass to Karen, but I did appreciate his apology in this one, so maybe that was an early sign of the show beginning to develop this relationship. The second to last episode belonging to the great tier is gonna be Overbooked, which came in with a score of 8.2 out of 10. A really strong quality of this episode is the writing, which balances the three little mini-plots effectively and builds the stress and tension nicely. This episode is not particularly funny, as is at this point characteristic of the episodes in the latter half of this tier, and it does have a rather frustrating moment when everyone confronts SpongeBob about splitting his time between the three of them, but other than that, this is a pretty solid episode. And then the last episode in the great tier is gonna be Shuffleboarding, which came in with a score of 8 out of 10. This episode is interesting in that, despite the title, this episode is not about shuffleboarding at all. It's about mass incarceration. Yeah, I made that same joke twice. What are you gonna do about it? Anyway, this episode is just pretty enjoyable. Again, not incredibly funny, but there's lots to like here. It's just kind of a bait and switch and takes a bit to really get started. So, the good tier. This tier had 6 episodes in it, which marks the first time that more episodes were in the okay tier than the good tier, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just get started on this tier. The first episode belonging to this tier is gonna be Chum Caverns, which came in with a score of 7.8 out of 10. This episode is, of course, good. It's generally pretty engaging and enjoyable, however, it feels somewhat lacking, mostly in the humor department, but also a little in the visual. Not really too much else I can say about this one, to be honest. It was good, but it lacked the tools it needed to be great. Up next is Gone, which came in with a score of 7.6 out of 10. Sometimes I think that I was too harsh on this episode, but, well, I can't really change that now, can I? The first 9 minutes of this episode are amazing. Like, literally, it is amazing tier content. This episode cultivates an atmosphere of horror just as skillfully as Squid's Visit, and like that episode, it doesn't shy away from the comedy as well, although I wouldn't call this episode as funny as Squid's Visit. But watching SpongeBob start to grow paranoid in his isolation is engaging and fun. However, all of that changes in the last 2 minutes when it's revealed that SpongeBob is the only one in Bikini Bottom because everyone not only had a day dedicated to not being around him, but they were having so much fun that they stayed away for weeks. There was maybe a way to make this reveal work, but for me it doesn't at all, especially seeing people like Patrick and Sandy there as well. It just feels really bad, and it drops the episode by 2 tiers, hence good tier. Following that episode is going to be one that I say much less about, which is The Slumber Party, which came in with a score of 7.5 out of 10. This episode is generally pretty solid. It's nice to see Pearl, the plot is fine, there's lots of good jokes here, and I like the dynamic between Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob. However, there are also times when the episode drags, and it had some missed opportunities in my opinion. Coming up next is gonna be To SquarePants or Not to SquarePants. The episode that I always think is a special when it's not, which had a 7.4 out of 10. This episode takes a bit to really get going. The setup is fine, but a little underwhelming, and Patrick is a bit of an irritating presence. However, once SpongeBob and Squidward start getting their dynamic going, the episode becomes very enjoyable and really earns a good opinion from me. I also think the topic for the episode is so silly that it's good, but I think that maybe it should have been sillier. The last 2 episodes of the good tier both came in with a 7.1 out of 10, and the first I've decided to place here is Grandpappy the Pirate. This episode utilizes a plot that I already don't like, where a character lies to someone close to them to impress them, and it does alright with it. I liked the character of Grandpa Redbeard along with his design, and I liked the pirate outfits that everyone had in this one. What I don't like is that this episode doesn't utilize Pearl the way that it perhaps should have, and that feels like a waste. And then the final episode belonging to the good tier is gonna be Ditchin', which had that 7.1 out of 10 score. This episode takes a bit to not only get good, but interesting in general. Until SpongeBob and Patrick get their books signed by Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, the episode is very much boring and dull. But after that, SpongeBob's kind of struggle to get back to class is fun and engaging. Like pretty much all the episodes from now on, this episode isn't very funny. In fact, a lot of the jokes are kinda meh, but it does have its moments for sure. Alright. That was the good tier. Let's talk about the okay tier. There were 7 episodes in this tier, which, as I said, is more than was in the good tier. Does this say something about season 6? Who's to tell? Well, I am, but I won't be until this tier list is done, so I'll leave y'all with your thoughts on that. Starting off the okay tier is Toy Store of Doom, which had a score of 6.9 out of 10. Everything that actually takes place inside the toy store is good for the most part. However, the biggest problem of this episode is that it takes entirely too long to get started, being boring that whole time, and it assaults my eardrums for a little bit with SpongeBob's awful singing. That is why this episode just about straddles the line between this tier and the one above it, because it's got a lot of good, but it's got too much bad too. After that is going to be Giant Squidward, which had a score of 6.6 out of 10. This episode is very much a mixed bag. There are times where the episode is good, engaging, and funnier than expected, but there's a lot more times where the episode is boring and not engaging. And there are a few times where the episode is not even good to look at, like the visuals are low-key repulsive, which does the episode no favors. Continuing through this tier, we've got Krusty Crushers, which had a score of 6.4 out of 10. For most of its runtime, this episode is boring. Like, that's really all I could say. The very beginning is interesting, and the very ending is fun, but until that final move from Patrick, this episode is just dull. So, a really good example of an episode belonging to this tier, because it's not like it did anything wrong, other than be boring. Following up that episode is Nautical Novice, which came in with a score of 6.3 out of 10. The plot of this episode is interesting and I like it. The execution is lacking. At first, it's a little boring, then it gets a little irritating, paralleling Mrs. Puff's own irritation, and then the last few minutes are actually really good. And then there is, of course, the ending, which brings us back to the status quo in a not great way. Feels a bit mean, since we're distanced from SpongeBob acting like an asshole by this point, not very satisfying either. Just a little bit of bad timing. The next episode for this tier also had a score of 6.3 out of 10, and that is The Clash of Triton. This was the final episode of Season 6, so that means if you watch this channel regularly, you already know what I'm about to say. This episode is boring as fuck, for many reasons, but primarily it's because it's about a new character we don't care about and his relationship to a character we barely know about, and then the comedy is poor and all that jazz. The episode isn't exactly annoying or anything, which is why this episode is part of this tier and not the one below, but yeah, very boring. The second to last episode of the okay tier is gonna be Grooming Gary, which had a score of 6.2 out of 10. Unsurprisingly, this episode is boring, but it also has the bonus, if you will, of being a little bit unpleasant at times when it comes to SpongeBob's treatment of Gary. This is the point, of course, but as I say literally all the time, the intention doesn't matter if I still don't like it. The humor in this episode also isn't really there. There's a couple of good jokes, but yeah, not that much. And then the last episode of the okay tier is gonna be Dear Vikings, which had a score of 6 out of 10. Another exceedingly dull episode. What really brings this episode down is that it's confusingly dull. I mean, the episode is about Vikings. How is that boring? Somehow, this episode finds a way, and that's a damn shame, making the episode a bit of a disappointment. Additionally, there's a couple of unpleasant things that make this episode down here at the edge of okay and mediocre tiers, like the design of the women Vikings, so cringy. Moving right along, it's time to start the mediocre tier. 7 episodes in total were a part of this tier, however 3 of them are actually a part of my bottom 5, so the timestamp is kind of split in 2 here. But anyway, let's get this tier started. So the first episode here in the mediocre tier is another controversial choice, and that is Boating Buddies, which came in with a score of 5.8 out of 10. I say that this is controversial because people hate this episode, and a 5.8 out of 10 is not all that low, even though it is in the category of episodes I don't really like. But anyway, so this episode has a few things going for it. I generally enjoyed the beginning portion and the driving scene and the joke of Squidward getting beat up. However, that's about all the positive things I can say, and everything else is either neutral or negative, because some of this episode is dull. Other parts of it, like the ending scene, are unpleasant. And then I think this episode missed a huge, huge opportunity to have Squidward and Mrs. Puff bond, or at least interact meaningfully. Also, the episode isn't really funny, but that's also because the episode didn't even try. There's not a lot of jokes here, or if they are, they fail to land so much that they don't even register as jokes to me. After that is gonna be Professor Squidward, which also came in for a score of 5.8 out of 10. This episode was just really boring. However, what led it to being placed in the mediocre tier rather than the okay tier, the home of boring episodes, is that this episode really just feels like a failure. That's the easiest way I can put it. There are attempts for jokes and they fail. The entire episode feels like we're waiting for it to truly begin. It just feels as though the writing is poor. Next up is Pet or Pess, which had a score of 5.6 out of 10. This is one of those episodes that is a very mixed bag. The end of the episode is pretty good and enjoyable, like once Larry shows up, it's consistently entertaining and at least a bit funny. However, the beginning of the episode, absolutely not. The design of the worms is repulsive, the poor treatment of Gary is just irritating, and for the most part, it's not even funny at all. And that first part of the episode is the larger influence on my feelings on it, hence it belonging to this tier. And then for the last episode of the mediocre tier before the bottom 5, that's going to be yet another infamous episode, Plankton's Regular, which came in with a score of 5.5 out of 10. I may not dislike this episode as much as others, but I'm not a fan of it. Primarily, my issue comes from Mr. Krabs in this episode, who is obsessed with not letting Plankton have a single customer. The execution on this is just not good. It just makes Mr. Krabs completely unlikable. Outside of a couple scenes that are irritating, like SpongeBob trying to feed Nat a patty, the episode is rather dull. However, there are things here that I like, such as a few jokes or even the twist, which I know is a very hot take. Well, alright then. So, just 5 more episodes remaining, which means we're down to my bottom 5 of season 6. I wonder if my rankings will surprise y'all. I suppose if you remember the exact score of each of these episodes, they won't, since none of these episodes tied, but who even remembers details like that? Anyway, my bottom 5 episodes span the Mediocre, Tolerable, and Abysmal tiers. Yes, I didn't use the bad tier and skipped straight to Abysmal. It happens sometimes. Alright, so for the first episode here in my bottom 5, or my 5th least favorite episode of season 6, that's gonna be The Card, which had come in with a score of 5.3 out of 10. The problem with this episode is that it's predictable and frustrating. While there's nothing wrong with being predictable, when you predict that an episode is going to be frustrating, it becomes a problem. Other than a few admittedly pretty good jokes, the episode isn't very funny, and until the frustration kicks in, it's actually rather boring as well. What's funny about this episode is that one of the moments that people hate, Patrick's line about how his stupidity varies, is one of the things I like most here, but I'm not going to get into all that here, that's what the review is for. At number 4 of the bottom 5 is gonna be Porous Pockets, which had a score of 5.2 out of 10. This episode was also boring, but it also irritated me because SpongeBob was just so out of character. And as I go into detail about during the review, while that was certainly the writing intent, the actual execution left a lot to be desired, making SpongeBob's being out of character really unpleasant and not a fit with the message the episode was trying to give. So it was just kind of a mess in that way. Coming in at number 3 of the bottom 5 and the last episode of the Mediocre tier is The Splinter, which had a score of 5 out of 10. This episode is just kind of a concoction of unpleasant. When it isn't busy being gross, which doesn't happen as often as you might think, it's boring. And in that way, the episode is a failure since it's meant to gross us out, but spends a lot more time being dull as hell. A decent beginning is the only thing that stops this episode from scoring any worse than it already does. Alright. And now, at number 2 of the bottom 5, and the only episode landing in the barely tolerable tier this season, is gonna be Sunbleached, which had a score of 4.7 out of 10. If you haven't seen the review for this episode, this low number probably surprises you. Here's the thing. The episode on its own is okay or mediocre tier level of quality. It's not really interesting, Patrick is irritating, and the conflict itself is just kinda annoying. However, what pushes this episode over the edge is that it breaks the illusion of escape for me and makes me think about real-world racial politics, and not in a good way, putting this briefly. That might be extreme for you, or a sign that I'm too... I don't fucking know, I'm not saying that word and giving the conservative co-opting of it any legitimacy. But this is just how I experienced the episode, and that's that on that. And without further ado, the very last episode to go up on this tier list, my number 1 least favorite episode of season 6 is clearly Choir Boys, which had come in with a score of 2.8 out of 10, making it the very first abysmal tier episode of this show. This episode is an auditory nightmare, and that's its primary issue. It's also dull, annoying, not funny, but the biggest issue is the fact that we're subjected to annoying noises and singing for far too many of these 11 minutes. It's just so goddamn irritating. So for once, I'll be aligning with popular opinion when I say that Choir Boys is a bad episode, and in this case, the worst of season 6. Before I move on, I just want to pause here for a second to let y'all take a nice long look at the completed tier list. Are there any surprises here? There's gotta be. I refuse to believe that all of these unpopular opinions aren't surprising. Any rankings here that you totally disagree with? I want to hear y'all's thoughts. My viewers do a pretty good job at commenting, but I could always do with reading more. Alright, that's enough of me fishing for comments. Let's move right along to discussing Season 6 in general. So, like usual, the first thing I'll be discussing in the big Season 6 discussion is the average episode rating of the season. Like I always say, the actual number itself doesn't really mean all that much when it comes to comparing it to other seasons, but it still means something. It kind of gives an idea of what kind of episodes made up the season, though not as well as the tier list or just the number of episodes in each tier do. But still. Okay, I'm stalling. Let me just say it. The average episode rating of Season 6 was a 7.6. This is the lowest average episode rating so far, however, it's really not much different than Season 5's, which was a 7.8. So, what does this mean? Well, not much, honestly. Yeah, Season 6 has the lowest average episode rating so far, so maybe that indicates that Season 6 is the worst season so far. That may or may not be an argument that I make later, but it doesn't really have much to do with this number. What's more important to take away here, in my opinion, is that this average episode rating is still quite strong. This is right in the middle of the good tier. That's still good. By definition, my top 3 tiers are all episodes I like, meaning, in this simplified way of looking at things, Season 6 is a season that I enjoy. And I think that point transitions us nicely into the actual proper Season 6 discussion, because despite what you might think, and despite what everyone says, I do not think that Season 6 is a bad season. To me, Season 6 is at the very least decent. Truthfully, I think it's good. And I know that as a take, this is a rather piping hot one, because Season 6 is undoubtedly one of the most infamous seasons of this show. I struggle sometimes in deciding whether Season 6, 7, or 8 has the worst reputation, but I think that the winner of that particular battle is Season 6. Season 7 has more loathed episodes, and Season 8, at that point, is part of a show that has been hated on for years, but Season 6 is where the quote-unquote modern SpongeBob hate really took off and latched on, not to mention all of the damn jokes about Season 6 being the downfall of the show. And that's a characterization of Season 6 that I flat out disagree with. I mean, I've already gone on this rant in a number of ways, at least regarding how Season 4 is thought about, but I can repeat myself for the sake of Season 6. Anytime someone makes an argument about a season being the beginning of the end of the show or something of that nature, expect me to disagree with it on principle, because those arguments necessitate that the show has an end, an era where it is bad, and I don't agree with that. There is no bad era of the show for me. It's all good. Some of it less good, like this season, as I'll be getting into, but it's never flat out bad. What I will agree with, however, when it comes to Season 6 is that I do see it as a transition of some kind. Just not the transition from good/decent to awful that many presently, or at least used to, see it as. And so this is what I'll be spending the majority of this discussion section talking about, which is how Season 6 is different from the seasons that came before it, and what that meant for it. And then I'll of course end with my assigned name for the season, which will wrap up my thoughts on it nicely. Let's start with the obvious. Season 6 already sets itself apart from the other seasons of this show by being the very first to contain an episode in the Abysmal tier. That it managed this without having an episode in the bad tier is almost kind of impressive in its own way. Season 6 is also the season with the most episodes in the bottom 4 tiers, or mediocre and below, so far, meaning that it has the most episodes that I either don't really like or actively dislike. So it probably comes as no surprise that Season 6 truly is my least favorite season so far. It had a strong start and a strong last fourth, but the middle of it was a mixed bag, as y'all just saw. Outside of this most obvious difference, I think that the biggest difference between Season 6 and the seasons that had come before is in the comedy. Specifically, Season 6 attempted to find comedy elsewhere, where previous seasons used the more prototypical formula of comedy born out of enjoyable moments. Season 6 sacrificed enjoyability to make comedic moments out of unenjoyable moments. Yes, this is me finally spending some time talking about the awkward humor in this season. If y'all remember any of my reviews this season, you might recall me saying something along the lines of, "I know that this is the point, but that doesn't mean I like it," at some point during those reviews. Probably multiple times, because I kept saying this again and again because these episodes kept spending their time reveling in dullness, awkward moments, or gross visuals. All very unenjoyable things that were used to try and make comedic moments, and that just doesn't work for me. I'm not entirely sure if the problem here is that the episodes used too many of these unenjoyable moments, or that they didn't use enough enjoyable ones, or more likely, it was both. I think that this is where season 6 is the weakest for me. Too many of the episodes are difficult to sit through, and they don't make for good viewing experiences. The other issue relevant here is that season 6 didn't execute this kind of comedy well enough, because there were times when the awkward humor worked, like in Truth or Square. So it's not impossible to get right, it's just that season 6 spent far too much time getting it wrong. Given that this is the first season using this kind of humor, maybe we can consider this a testing ground? I guess we'll have to see if season 7 expands on this or not before we can come to that conclusion. Another way that season 6 is a bit different from other seasons is that, to me, it seemed to be playing it safe. And I don't mean in the plots. This season used the same 4 characters over and over and over again, barely including any others. Not even Plankton was used as much as I expected. And don't even get me started on Sandy, Pearl, Mrs. Puff, or Karen. Heavy on Sandy. Gary, of course, was not used very much either, but that's not a surprise. And listen, it's not even that SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs were used every time, but it's that they were used in the same combinations too. And okay, let me be fair. The only 2 combinations of these characters that aren't used frequently are Mr. Krabs and Patrick, and then Mr. Krabs and Patrick and Squidward. But also, the fact that all the other combinations of these 4 are very overused in this season perhaps points to the need to include other characters in the rotation. Having these same characters used again and again can grow stale when this is the kind of show that uses similar plots and locations, or especially when different plots utilize the same kinds of character dynamics. At the tail end of the season, there were a couple episodes that did perhaps point to a future trend in the right direction, and these episodes were Single Cell Anniversary, which gave Plankton and Karen's, as well as Plankton and SpongeBob's dynamics more attention, and Chum Bucket Supreme, which gave Patrick and Plankton some meaningful interactions. Season 6 as a whole, was weak in the character dynamic department, but given how these came at the end of the season, maybe this means season 7 will pick up that slack. As a result of the shift to unenjoyable/ineffective comedy and playing it safe, I think that season 6 has a lot of missed potential. At first, this manifested as poor episode endings, like in Gone, or to some, Nautical Novice. But as the season progressed, this became a problem embedded into entire episodes. The amount of episodes that had interesting ideas that were then wasted by the unenjoyable executions, or by not actually exploring those ideas, was far too many. Pretty much every episode landing in the okay tier and below was guilty of this on some level. Alright, I just spent a lot of time talking about where season 6 failed. Let me spend some time talking about where it did well, because again, I do think this is a good season, even if it is the weakest in the show thus far. So, season 6 had a lot of really good episodes. Like always, my amazing tier contained the most episodes. Together, good and great are just about even with the rest of the tiers below them. And one thing I said a ton this season are the words hidden gem, because I think that a lot of the good episodes in this season are forgotten in favor of the bad ones. This is one of the main reasons why I find season 6 to be overhated. Saying that season 6 is the worst season of the show is fair and valid, but I don't agree that this season is horrible. Those are 2 different things. And I know that I feel more positively towards many episodes of season 6 than most, which is one of the reasons why I don't dislike it like others might. There's just so much good here. How could I ever see this season as bad? The show certainly hasn't lost its touch or anything of that sort. It just had a bit of a stumble, perhaps. And then the last thing I want to talk about before I get into naming the season is that even though I think that season 6 generally played it safe when it came to its episodes, I would be remiss not to acknowledge that there were times that it tried to be adventurous, like how season 5 was. Squid's Visit, SpongeBob SquarePants vs. The Big One, To SquarePants or Not to SquarePants, and Gone all tried to do something very different, I think, and those are just a few of the examples. And in some ways, I think that the big issue that I had with season 6, those questionable writing and comedy decisions, was at least partially a result of some attempts at trying something new. I mentioned this earlier, that the awkward humor here almost feels like an experiment, and I'm not sure if I want to completely write it off as a failed experiment either, since it did work sometimes. But still, at the end of the day, season 6 is definitely not as adventurous as season 5, not even a little bit, and that just might be this season's biggest failure. Maybe the reasons the new style of comedy didn't work is because they weren't fully invested in, and so a precarious balance between old styles and new styles was thrown off to give us this boring mess. I think that this season tried to play it safe, but there was an undercurrent of experimentation, and the lack of commitment to either of these angles may be what resulted in the season 6 we have today. Maybe that's too romantic of a thought, but that's just what I do when it comes to this show. Analyze and maybe overanalyze and have a lot of fun while doing so. Alright, well, I've just about covered everything I need to regarding Season 6, so let's name it. I've decided that the name that works best for Season 6 is the Glacial Season, and let me tell you why. Glaciers are slow, cold, strong, and contain hidden depths, and I think that each of these descriptors fits Season 6 perfectly. Slow refers to the vibes of this season, with the frequent dull and awkward moments of nothing much happening throughout the episodes. Cold, I think, is a good way to describe the opinions towards this season, as they're so negative. I also think that in general, this season does have a cold vibe to it. It doesn't feel as warm to me as previous seasons, I think because of how it more frequently fails to engage me. Strong is probably the least fitting of these descriptors, or at least I have to do some more mental gymnastics to get there, but I think that Season 6 really latches on to the strong base or foundation of this show, or at least the strong previous seasons, as it plays it safe almost the entire time, not being too daring or risky or going all the way with the experiments it does conduct. It doesn't really change either, which goes hand in hand with the slow descriptor. And then lastly, I think that Season 6 most definitely has hidden depths. It's got so many good episodes that are unfortunately overlooked, which is why I consider this season to not only be overhated, but also underrated in many ways. Wrapping things up, I want to take a second to consider what comes next. I've already mentioned my thoughts for where Season 7 might take us. In my opinion, if Season 7 is going to be an improvement over Season 6, it needs to start melting this metaphorical glacier here. Season 6's biggest flaw is its lack of adventure, its snuffed out flame, so if Season 7 wants to be better, it's gotta light that spark back up. As always, I'll be ending this video with some closing thoughts of mine, because at this point it's routine that I offer some closing thoughts on the video of closing thoughts. You know, as I was discussing the tensions between playing it safe and experimentation that I found in Season 6, I was thinking about how this reads as the textbook studio versus creatives conflict. I'm not sure that I'd say that this is what happened here, that Nickelodeon had stifled the creativity of the crew, but maybe it's a possibility? I wouldn't be shocked if you told me that Nickelodeon influenced the focus on the core 4 characters, at least. The rest of the problems in this season, though, I don't see what Nickelodeon would have to gain by not letting the writers experiment with their comedy. The only thing they would do is probably stop anything age inappropriate. Studio meddling has always felt like a very nebulous argument to me anyway. It just gets brought up for any and everything involving a creative project tied to some kind of studio, and it almost feels like a scapegoat at this point. Maybe I'm just irritated by all the people trying to undercut my own argument about Arcane with "but Riot," but because for that video, Riot Games is irrelevant. But that's besides the point. I just wanted to give voice to this little thought I had about Nickelodeon and the SpongeBob crew. And now comes the part where I don't talk about Season 6 directly anymore, and more about my closing thoughts as I close out these last 4 or so months of reviews. It has been a fucking ride this time around. Y'all don't even know. Keeping up these reviews while fighting against that arcane hyperfixation that latched on so strongly for 2 months was not for the faint of heart. But I did it! Yeah, I had lots of pauses this season, but the point is we made it through. The experience of reviewing this season has been the most absurd one so far. I mean, other than the pauses and the hyperfixation, there's the big elephant in the room of the video essay that I made that blew the hell up. That was, and still is, wild. And it's gotten this channel a lot of attention. I've hit 300 subscribers when reviewing Season 5. As I write this script, I'm sitting at 2,300. That is amazing. So amazing. Like, I don't even know what to say about that. I mean, I feel like I should do a subscriber special at some point, but I should probably wait until I'm a little bit freer and then try to come up with an idea of some kind. I've already done a Q&A. What else is there to do? And then I just want to reiterate that even though my video essay got a lot of positive attention, and even though I proved to myself I can make a video essay, I have no plans to do that again. This channel was always going to be about the SpongeBob reviews, and that's not going away, not until I finish the show. So if you were ever concerned, don't be. The video essay was nice, but I just don't want to do that again. Alright, and then one last thing, y'all already know, a big thank you goes out to everybody watching today, everyone who has subscribed, everyone who has liked, everyone who has commented. I love all y'all so much, man. I can't believe that my reviews are still getting any attention at all, and I can't believe I'm still here going strong 2 years later, even if I've had to take a hiatus or two in between. It's so weird to think season 7 is right around the corner. I just appreciate the support so much. And with that, it's about time for me to close out this very long review and to finally put season 6 behind me. I'll see you all in the next review where I'll begin season 7.